You are now listening to the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Hi, this is Irena Kovarova. I'm based in New York. I'm a film programmer, and I'm here with Tereza Brdečka, Czech screenwriter, professor at Film Academy of Music in Prague. She's an author, and she's also the daughter of Jiří Brdečka, one of the core creators of Prague Nights, the film that we are here presenting with Deaf Crocodile. I'm the founder of Comeback Company, and Deaf Crocodile approached me to collaborate on releases of Czechoslovak films, and this is our first collaboration. Prague Nights was introduced to the Czech audiences as a film with macabre tales about supernatural events in Prague of the past and today. And I hope that sort of sets the scene for Tereza to tell us a little background about how the film came about.
Yes, so in fact, the original idea came from 1966 when the Czechoslovak cinema was really on the top with the films of the new waves. And then, because the country was more open, there was a big interest also for international co-producers, because Prague is beautiful and the sets were nice and the professionals were very much on the top. And the idea came that eventually it should be not only this new wave films, which are more or less art cinema for very few viewers, but that Czechoslovakia should also present its, I would say, mainstream films. And in this very moment, a couple of Swiss producers were asking for a co-production film of a couple of tales about Prague between original Switzerland and Czechoslovakia. So this was the original idea to promote mainstream cinema, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And the creator was your father, right?
Well, the original creator was my father, Jiří Brdečka, who was very successful author of comedies. He was writing films since the beginning of 50s, and he was also very well accepted in the Western countries, also because of his career of the director of animated films. And he was very much aware, and he knew a lot of these Prague legends. So he was very skilled in a subject. And he was the one who said once on the meeting, and we have a document about it, he said, I think that it should be also an idea for the full-length film and not only for the television. So this was the very beginning of the project.
Mm-hmm. Did he collect stories, or how did he, come up with these legends that he included in the film?
Basically, in these times, which was the time of my childhood, I was around 10 years old. The Prague was kind of full of legends and full of mystery, much more than today, I would say. And my father, who was not born in Prague, was one of the people who were collecting Prague legends, not only the very famous one that everyone knew, but also the hidden legends that were somehow hidden, for example, in the German-speaking communities in Prague, in the Jewish communities, and so on. So he knew a lot about this. So the origin of these fairy tales, of these tales in the film, are somewhere in the existing legends, but he was developing them.
Do you know how him, or in general, how the creative team was built to sort of accompany him on this journey? How did he choose his collaborators?
It was not up to him to choose all of them, of course. I know that his idea was that he would become really a director of the first tale we are going to see, which is the one which is called Prague Golem. But on the other side, it was very clear that he cannot become a director of all the stories because he was not experienced enough, and also he was busy on other fields. But now we must mention the fact that this was the period around 67, 68, which was extremely dynamic in the whole country, in whole Europe, and possibly in the whole Western world, because it was the famous period of 68 coming. And Czechoslovak cinema was very much on the top, and everyone was really very, very busy. So I remember that my father was facing the fact that his idea, his film, is more and more fragmented, and I don't think he was happy about that. That the idea that the stories are managed and directed with different directors, and not only that there is not only one DOP, that also there is two authors of the music and so on. And I know that in the end he was really very unhappy of that the film didn't have one and single form. Paradoxically, today we are much more used on this fragmentation and everything. So when I'm watching the film now, it seems to me quite okay. But in this very time when it was born, it was not like that, and it was not well accepted.
Mm-hmm. I would like to return to a little speaking about the time and the period and what was happening in the Czechoslovak cinema at that time. I sort of made this kind of small list of presenting what 1968 in Czechoslovak cinema meant. I mean, politically, that was, as you said, a time of sort of liberation. The cultural scene was much freer. There was also the Communist Party had a new person at the head, Alexander Dubček, and that kind of kicked off many changes. But also on the cinema scene, the Czechoslovak New Wave and the even filmmakers from the older generations who were quite inspired by this sort of rebirth of cinema, they were celebrating a huge success abroad. And for instance, in at the beginning of 1968, Jiří Menzel got an Oscar for Closely Watched Trains. Then Cannes Film Festival was about to screen three Czech films in competition, which of course we know that did not happen, but Czechs would have a great chance to maybe win an award. There was Forman's Fireman's Ball, it was Němec's The Party and the Guests, and Jiří Menzel's Capricious Summer. But also there were films by the older generation like František Vláčil, who had great success at home with Markéta Lazarová, which premiered in 1967, and there was also an interesting movement as the film industry of the Czech filmmakers were sort of banding together. They created this association that was really helping them to negotiate and sort of fight for no censorship in cinema, etc. And unfortunately, when the invasion of the Soviet armies and the Warsaw Pact came in August 1968, that was unfortunate end to this Prague Spring and this great time. And but this film was actually shot just around that time. Can you say a little about that?
You mean about the showing in the film in the movie theaters in Prague? Well, this was complicated because the film was finished, as far I could see, in October 1968, which was the moment where the Prague streets were still full of Soviet tanks. And starting this moment, of course, all inhabitants of the country had definitely other problems than Prague legends, and so the film was introduced in movie theaters in April '69. and it was a very short career. It was a very short career, about 1 month or not more, I think, just because of these events, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And do we also mention that basically the Czechoslovak cinema was a sort of state-run, of course, during communist regime, but this fact, actually, the nationalizing of Czech cinema didn't start with the communists. It started already in 1945, and the idea was to be able to create more artistic cinema because it's a small country, and so the filmmakers didn't want just comedies, right?
Yeah, well, thank you, Irena, for saying that. Indeed, Czechoslovakia was the only country where the cinema was, I would say, not even nationalized. It's not a good word. It was, I would say, centralized from the will of the producers and distributors shortly after the World War II, and the idea was much more to create a system which was something like a Hollywood system. That means very strong studios where with the creative producers, with a diversity, with a possibility where the very different filmmakers can develop their talents and their ideas. And it was possible because after World War II, the Czechoslovakia, thanks to the complicated historical issues and facts, the Czechoslovak cinema was very much in shape. Yes, because practically all the German production was moved in Prague because of the bombardment in Germany. And after World War II, there was incredible sales and box office in all the cinemas. For example, all the cinemas, and there were a lot of them in the country, had to open the box offices already in the 9 o'clock in the morning because 10 was too late. People were lining up the whole street. So I would say the richness and the wealthiness of the Czechoslovak cinema was enormous, and the problem was that only after the communist, I would say, putsch, which was without the election in 1948, this centralized cinema was taken by the state with all that it could represent, with the repressions and the ideology and so on. And it took another 15 years before the Czechoslovak cinema could wake up. And in this moment, it was technically very highly developed.
Mm-hmm. Which is also visible on the amount of production. I looked at in 1968, there was over 150 films produced, including documentaries, shorts, etc. There were about 50 narrative features, and that's for a country of 10 million. I mean, it's an incredible output. And so this film represented more of the mainstream cinema, where, of course, there was an abundance of comedies and dramas and thrillers, but also the Czechoslovak New Wave, and this is just one piece of this very rich mosaic of production in Czechoslovakia. But now we've already, in the background, we have the film, of course. This is an audio commentary. And so we've gone through, this film is sort of a portmanteau of stories, that there is a framing story that takes place in contemporary Prague. And then there are 3 stories that each takes place in a different period, and is also a very, very distinct, very different story. And so we are here with the story of about the Golem in Prague, which it's titled "The Last Golem," and this was directed by your father. There is a very important bit about, of course, Prague is one character in this film, but there is also very interesting that there is this Jewish story that is in this film, which was also quite unusual for Czechoslovak culture. And I think that it's sort of an expression of the freedom of that time, that actually people could also put Jewish stories on in a film. So what is the story of Golem, and why Last Golem?
Well, if you are in Prague, you cannot miss Golem. It's I would say it's almost the same thing like the Eiffel Tower of Paris. It's really something like an emblem of Prague, and the original story, which is probably much older, is one of the eldest story in the history of humanity. But this is the story of the rabbi who constructed or sculpted a figurine, a man out of earth, and he with the help of so-called Shem, of some words, could awake him to life. And the original idea was that Golem should help to the Jewish people in the ghetto or in Prague to survive and just to defend the Jewish people. And then the Emperor Rudolf II, who was, first of all, he was very much interested in Jewish, in everything that was Jewish, in Jewish culture and Jewish people, and also he got a lot of loans from Jewish bankers, and he asked the rabbi, this one that we are going to see, to make live the Golem again. But the rabbi says that he couldn't do it because the Golem can only serve to the Jewish people and not to the pride of the man, not to the egoism or so on. So this is the story. So my father, first time he was working with the theme of Golem, it was in 1951 with the actor Jan Werich. And this was a comedy, very nice comedy, which was called, very wealthy also, which was called Emperor's Baker. And since then he was fascinated by Golem and by Jewish Prague, and he was collecting books. He had a lot of books about Golem in different languages, and in the end, this was one of his preferred, I would say, themes, Golem. And so when he had an occasion, finally, in his when he was 50 years old, to make his own Golem for himself and film, he immediately said yes, and he started the preparation the same way like if he would work for the animated movies. That means that he had a very precious visual script, and he was a little bit unhappy because during the shooting he was finding that he should never do that, and he didn't find in himself a real director of the feature. Yeah, this is, for example, this very beautiful actress. She's called Lucia Novotná Hofmeistrova. She was one of the most beautiful actresses in Prague. In this very time, she was a dancer at the pantomime, and she was from the very prominent Jewish family.
Wow. Well, we can also talk about the lead actor in this episode is Jan Kluság, who's actually his main occupation was a composer, a very often engaged composer for film music, and his engagement as an actor in cinema started with the Czechoslovak New Wave. It was Esther Krumbachová who demanded that he was cast in the film The Party and the Guests that she created with Jan Němec. She witnessed him as part of their sort of close circles, and she loved his energy. And so this goes along with the Czechoslovak New Wave engaging non-actors. Often, sometimes they were true non-actors, people that were cast from auditions, but sometimes it was just people found on the street or people from the society. Apparently, Pavel Kluság, Jan Kluság's son, said that Jan Kluság, as a young man, was so enthralled by the theater of Jiří Voskovec and Jan Werich, Osvobozené divadlo, the liberated theater, which was, a theater of satire, and but also included a lot of music. And he said that he was torn between wanting to be Jaroslav Ježek, the composer, or an actor, but eventually he chose to be a composer. And he made several. He was in several of the films. He was in Daisies. He was also in another film by Jan Němec, Martyrs of Love, and he was also in Jereš's Valerie and Her Week of Wonders, which was at the end in the 70s, but that was pretty much the end of his acting career. Do we know anything about the cinematographer Jan Kališ, who worked on this?
Oh yes, of course. But Jan Kališ was just a couple of words about Jan Klusák, the composer. My father was always saying that he loved to act, that he was simply so charmed about himself that it was truly always a big joy to work with him. And in fact, during these 3 or 4 years, he was acting in something like 4 or 5 films. Or if you remember, in one of these late films by Věra Chytilová, she used only his voice, not only not his face. He was played by Jan Schmidt, but she was using his amazing voice. So where we were, yes, Jan Kališ. But he was a very famous DOP. I mean, he was always also DOP of Pavel Juráček, the case of the beginning executor, or how it is the English title. This was a time of the very big DOP school in the Prague studios. For this, I would say, I teach in this film academy, and I was also studying film editing there in 70s. Of course, during these communist times, it was not a big deal to stay there, but there was still a very, very professional DOP department. That means that people are studying 5 years to become DOPs. Then they had to be like assistants or DOP assistants on Barrandov for 5 years, which meant that in the moment they started to work by themselves, they were absolutely perfect. So in this very time, you can see really something like 10 big names that could really exist everywhere in the world, like Jan Kališ, Jaroslav Kučera, exactly this Uldrich, the diversity of the filmmakers, the diversity of the visuality they were using. This was really fantastic. This is something that you cannot see today in the films.
Mm-hmm. There is also an important part that we can see in this episode is involvement of artists, visual artists in cinema. Czech culture or Czech scene is actually quite small, so there was no dedicated artist who only worked in film. Also, actors worked a lot in theater, and so did directors. But I found this amazing that these artists like Jan Švankmajer or Hugo de Martini, who actually created the Gola
sculpture,
the
sculpture.
That they were involved. Do you know some more information about Hugo de Martini?
But Hugo de Martini, he was only in pure sculpture, nothing more. In fact, I didn't find anything for him like film collaboration. But I must say one thing: this was a generation, or the 2 generations, which were all the time in contact in Prague, yes, like in the cafes and always making things together. I always say, and this is very funny, that it started during the World War II out of the simple fact that people didn't have much money for heating. So, for example, my father and Miloš Makovec, they were working in a Café Slavia, and there they were other people working and talking. So everything they were doing together. And myself, I still remember a little bit of this togetherness. So it's normal that in the society of filmmakers, they were from time to time painters coming or writers or whatever. People were in contact personally. So it was not like I see like a beautiful sculpt or beautiful painting, so I will go and see who did it. People knew each other personally, and they also wanted to work with this or that person because there was a personal sympathy. And I think it's very it's very visible on these films, because this I would say enthusiasm you can see on the Czech films from these times, it's also come from there.
Yes,
that's personal approach.
It also seems to me that this is how your father was choosing some of his collaborators, right? They came from a close-knit group.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, it's so complicated to make the film that if you should plus deal with people you don't like, it's really a disaster then.
I think we have a moment now to speak a little more about sort of the magic Prague, like how Prague actually, to people who've never been to Prague, what Prague is like. I mean, it's this episode is actually shot in the studio, but it's replicating the famous Jewish synagogues in Prague, which the old new synagogue is dating all the way to the Middle Ages, and that's what Prague to me is like. I grew up in the same neighborhood as you, which is Malá Strana, and for me it was always walks going through the centuries that we witness everywhere around you. The architectural gems are still present there from all the different periods. Prague was founded in 10th century, and this is all part. But I would think that they actually recreated the atmosphere in the studio pretty well, don't you say?
Definitely, but not only in the studio itself, but also with the lighting and everything. Here, I must say that I was there. I remember my father took me once for on the set during the shooting of Golem, so I could see exactly this scene, like Golem was growing and becoming alive. This was the animation in this very moment, so you can imagine, because it was stop motion, that it was extremely boring, but still it was quite impressive to watch. And then I remember that I was on the set in one moment when these two guys, rabbis, assistants, are on synagogue balcony, and it was actually shot on another place of the next to Old Village Square. And Prague of this time really looked very mysterious, because today one should ask how it is possible that such a beautiful and wealthy town or city it's in such a terrible state, because in fact we must say that Prague was not repaired or reconstructed, and I'm speaking much more about these historical monuments the whole 20th century. No one digged there, it was only after 1990 when Prague was reconstructed. So it really looked a little bit, and you remember that, Irena, it looked like a city of the ghosts a little bit. And plus there was a lot of closed gates and closed small shops, and one was asking all the time, what's behind? Who is behind? If there are there some ghosts waiting for their opportunity, or where is everybody left, or how it really is, and what is the past of these buildings, when obviously that was nothing like a future. So like that, yeah. And I think that in all this film, it should be much more about Prague, but they could not present Prague much more, because in the beginning, in the middle of the shooting, there were Russian tanks coming, so the shooting was very difficult outside.
Mm-hmm. That's actually maybe one of the reasons why the hotel scenes was shot in Brno, the swanky hotel from the 60s, actually.
How was it? But this is very sure, but because I think it was supposed to be shot in Alkron, but Hotel Alkron is next to Wenceslav Square, which is really the crucial point of Prague, full of tanks all the time still. still in autumn.
So yes, so there was a brief Brno, which is the second largest city in Czech Republic, or it was of the Czech part of Czechoslovakia. Then was standing in for Prague when Prague could not perform itself. There's, as you said, that this part uses stop motion animation. Maybe we should speak a little more about your father's own animated films, what he was working on at that time, and how he got into animation in the first place.
He said always that it was purely by accident. First of all, the first animated studio in Prague was founded by Nazis in 1942, 1943, because the Nazi regime wanted to reunite the studios around the occupied Europe, and there was one element missing, and this was animation. They wanted to have something like a Disney company. And Prague was a very good place for that, because it was not bombed. There was a lot of skilled people, and plus there was something else. There was the whole generation of the young people who couldn't study because universities were closed, and who wanted definitely to avoid to go for the labors in Germany. So they collected, or they invited some of these young people who understood a little bit cinema and who were the good drawers, which was the case of my father. And Germans founded these studios, which was, by the way, founded in the used to be Jewish studio of Mr. and Madame Dodal. And then, of course, what happened 2 years, and they made some films, and they were learning animations one after another. 1 or 2 years later, it was closed, and when the war was over and the cinema industry was nationalized, the same crew formed this first studio, Brothers Intrigue. So my father was employed there somehow by accident. If there wouldn't be a war, if there wouldn't other things come, it would never happen. And then Jiří Trnka was named in the head of the studios, but Jiří Trnka left very soon to form his own studio of stop motion cinema, and my father stayed there making his own films. And he was one of the very rare directors of the animated cinema who was not animated in the same time, but he was using different art directors and different concepts for each of his 35 films. And also, if you watch this Last Golem, you have a feeling that in the composition and everything, using, first of all, his experience of the director of the animated films. It's only that today I have a feeling that it's really kind of style of kind of very special style of fiction film also, and this is what I find very interesting.
That is fascinating. Is there, from a script point of view, something special about this film that comes to your mind, as since you're so well versed in how a film is built on the page in a script?
Listen, I'm as someone who is a screenwriter, and I'm teaching screenwriting. What is very surprising for me, that in the same time, all the characters you can see are very, I would say, rough. They are not psychologized or whatever. Yeah? Those are really characters. I would say animated films, and in the same time, this is very emotional film with something like a humanist idea. So this is what I found fascinating. Like with this, I would say, quite a formalist film means you can create something that it's really a living organism and real something like a living story.
Mm-hmm. That is truly fascinating. There is quite a number of collaborators on this film, and I wanted to speak about the other directors that participated on this project, and I think it's a good time to speak about Miloš Makovec, who was a very close friend of your father, I understand, and that's, I think, interesting also on this film, that there are people of different generations working on this film. And so for me, the name Miloš Makovec was quite unknown. And so I was wondering if you could tell us a little more about this director.
Well, first of all, I would say that the best film Miloš Makovec directed, written by my father, is the film called In Czech Ztracenci, and now I don't know how to spell it in English, something like a Lost People.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Yeah, and this is a film from 1956, and this film was in the main competition in Cannes Film Festival. But the problem was that it was the same time where I think Seventh Seal by Bergman or something like that was there, a couple of and the film by Fellini, so there was no chance. But this is really, you should see it. This is a very, very beautiful film, kind of Western from 18th century, from the Austrian-Prussian War, and if not exactly my father and Miloš Makovec met each other in 1940 in Prague, somewhere in the society, in the cafe, and then they were sharing the flat 11 years until the moment they got married, my father and Miloš Makovec. Not together, I mean, but everyone with his wife. And so really they had something like a very, very common life and common jokes and common, I would say, life approach. They were both friends of Trnka's family, and they were doing things together. It's only that my father was, I think, much more creative, and he had much more ideas, but could be also that it was only 30 years after when I found that Miloš Makovec was a half Jewish origin, which was very difficult in Prague during the World War II. And he was partly in the resistance movements, and of course a lot of his family disappeared in Holocaust in the camps, and many of these people are very traumatized by these events, of course. So that's why, for example, my father was always, my father didn't like, for example, where these films about the Jews or Holocaust, which are very formalist, because he had a lot of friends who disappeared in Holocaust, and he didn't like when someone was taking advantage from these tragedies. So then he was often worked with Miloš Makovec in a couple of films in 50s, which on films that are not that much important. Then they made this Lost People, and since then Miloš Makovec practically stopped working, and he only came back for this project. But I don't think that they understood each other very well on this. But I know nothing about it. Mm-hmm. I think that in the end, Miloš Makovec was much more realistic or skeptic. Was in another vision than my father. That he was much more in comedy, and my father was much more in these, I would say, mystical things.
Mm-hmm. There was, in my research, one film that really caught my eye that Miloš Makovec directed, and that was actually in 1957. It's a film called Easy Life.
Yeah.
And that's a very, the reason why it caught my eye is because it's based on a script by Milena Tobolova, who to many Americans, she's known as Milena Jelinek or Jelinek.
Isn't she this Milena Jelinek? This I have no idea about it. It's interesting.
And she was a student at FAMU. She wrote the script, which won many accolades, and it was very unusual for a female screenwriter to get a film script accepted at the Film Barandov Studios, and it was developed together with Makovec, and there was a film that is understood as sort of that anticipated the Czechoslovak New Wave. It had this anti-hero. It was capturing a student life. It was cast similarly. There was kind of unknown or beginner actors, and unfortunately, the film was really subject to a huge critique, and both Milena Tobolova, Jelinek, and Miloš Makovec apparently suffered for that. And I know that Milena then had to immigrate because she just became a persona non grata, and then she became a fantastic professor of screenwriting at Columbia University, thanks to the invitation by Frank Daniel and Miloš Forman, who sort of asked her to join the teaching body there. So we should, now that we are in the framing story, that was actually Miloš Makovec directing. He co-wrote the script with Vratislav Blažek, who was actually also his frequent collaborators on other films. And I learned that Vratislav Blažek, of whom I had no idea existed before studying for this film, had many hats on during his illustrious career, albeit brief. Can you speak a little about this interesting artist?
Vratislav Blažek was definitely one of the most invented screenwriters and playwrights ever in Czech culture, I would say. He was like an eruption of ideas all the time. He was an extremely funny guy. And I mean, this was a typical for these times. Vratislav Blažek, who was from the same time Náchod, like Josef Škvorecký and other people, they were chums in the very beginning. So he was definitely communist. He was very much believing in communist ideology after World War II, and this was nothing like that he wanted to make a career. He was simply persuaded. He was idealistic. And first, he was writing playwrights for the very famous Divadlo, the Theater of the Satire, when the Lemonade Joe were introduced for the first time after World War II. And like that, I think he began a very close friends of my father. I mean, as I told you before, all these guys who were, I would say, gathered on this film, they were playing cards together in Prague. This was one of the inspiring moments. Every Sunday night, they were playing cards together, making jokes and laughing and inventing things. And first of all, Vratislav Blažek is the author of a very special comedy that is known by certain American freaks also, which is called Green Goals, otherwise Starci na chmelu, Old Men on the Hops, but it's called Green Gold. It exists with English subtitles on YouTube also, and which was something like the most Czech popular film ever, still in the quite a tough era, and which was presenting like something like a first sign of liberation. Well, if you see the film now, it's really completely ideological. It's horrible, but there are still a lot of funny moments, and it's good to be seen. Vratislav Blažek, after finishing this very film, Prague Nights, he delivered one and last script, which is called Světáci in Czech. They mean how do you spell the word?
Men About Town.
Man About Town, which is, I don't know if it can be understood by foreign audience. I'm not quite sure, but it was an enormous comedy. And then he also left for the exile in Germany, and his fate was very, very sad in the beginning, because he was always a gambler and he died very soon.
Mhm. I learned, yes, this hop pickers is actually another name for the film that you mentioned about the people.
Regal.
Yes, it was a musical. Actually, it was one of the first musicals really of that type.
And this is exactly what is interesting to talk about, because I mean, all these the communist scene in this country was in the same time very much against everything which was American, but in the same time they were absolutely seduced by that. That means that in fact in Soviet Union they were in fact copying Disney style to establish their own studios, and because there was no one in the Czech cinemas, and someone could see somewhere by chance West Side Story, they said, let's invent a Czechoslovak musical. So in order to have something really seducing for the young people, and they really, the way how they copy the style of West Side Story, it's enormous, but it's the same time very funny, and it's a real comedy. So this is something, a film to be seen by Vratislav Blažek.
I especially like his follow-up music, which is one of the translations is "Lady on the Tracks," "Dáma na kolejích." That's
one of
my
the first
favorite.
feminist films, yeah.
Yes,
one of the first feminist films, I would say.
Yeah, I truly believe that it's and it does not end in happy end, and it's a very like how a woman dreams of what kind of life she could live, and then but she still ends up in gray Prague in a gray uniform. But again, it's a very inventive, very colorful musical, and one of my favorite films of that era. He was also, I learned, author of many lyrics for many films like Your Father's Lemonade Joe, but also for the songs in Black Peter, Miloš Forman's films, and also author of many very popular songs, just that you would hear and would be performed by the most popular singers of that time. Well, now I guess we moved from the framing story to the next story in the film, and that's Brett's Slippers, which is a film that was directed by Ewald Schorm, and working from Your Father's Treatment. The script was developed written by Ewald Schorm together with his director of photography, František Uldrich. It's as you mentioned in your interview with Dennis, that is also part of this Blu-ray release. It seems quite odd that Ewald Schorm would participate on such a project. Would you like to say something about his films? How he's known to film connoisseurs of that era?
But of course, Ewald Schorm, I think he's much less known in the United States than in Europe, where the people who are in fact much more who know much more about Czechoslovak New Wave. They were always fascinated by Ewald Schorm, who was the same generation like Věra Chytilová and Forman, but his talent was always very heavy and very philosophical, and I'm not sure to which point it's possible to be transferred in a for example American way of perceiving films. For example, what is important to be said that he was one of the co-author of the films which were like the films of the end of studies on the Film Academy, which were Pearl on the Bottom, which was the film of the short stories written by Bohumil Hrabal, directed by exactly Ewald Schorm, Věra Chytilová, and Jiří Mencel. And then he made, for example, a film which is called The Return of the Lost Son, and a couple of films of this kind, which were from the contemporary time, a philosophical film about what's happening in the mind of the people of the younger generation who see no future for them in the communist Czechoslovakia. They are in fact believing in, I would say, bright future. But their problem is that the contemporary is not bright and they are not able to live in this. So that's why he was very much praised by audience. And I was very surprised that he was chosen to work on this Prague Nights episode, Bread Slippers, which is in fact a Faustian story from 18th century. But you know something about it?
Yes, I have a couple theories. So first of all, about Schorm, apparently before he started studying film, he was very much interested in theater and opera. And so, he always had a relationship to period drama, even through opera. But he was, as filmmakers at that time, they were usually employed by a different unit in the film industry. He was employed by the documentary sort of unit of Czechoslovak film production. But at this time, he actually became, for the first time, employee of the film studios Barrandov, so fully employed to make narrative features. And but he, apart from that, he was also working in TV. And in right before this period, he made a very popular TV chamber piece called King and a Woman, which was sort of a small film that was devoted that was spearheaded by Jan Werich, this larger than life figure of Czech theater and cinema, who worked with your father on who directed the Emperor's Baker. This chamber piece is a story about Henry VIII and his wife, his last wife, and they have this argument. And it's sort of like a tug of war between a woman and a man.
Catherine Parrs.
Catherine Parrs, exactly. And so this is a period piece, and not only it's a period piece which would lead to this, but also obviously working with Jan Werich, coming to the same circles as your father, and possibly that could have been a chance meeting that led to this. Of course, working for Studio Barrandov and maybe kind of having to accept things that were presented to him at the beginning could have been a reason. And also he worked with Milena Dvorska, who's actually the mysterious lady of the framing story and also the lead in the last story of this film. He worked with her on theater, actually putting on stage a piece by Josef Škvorecký and working with him. He was working with Josef Škvorecký on a film, End of a Priest, at this time. And so I think, as you said, like, people met through, social circles, and these could be all reasons why he accepted this film.
Yeah, that's really possible. And plus this King and the Woman, it's also a period piece. Now I'm watching this Bread Slippers, and it's really unbelievable the way how it is shot with these candles and everything, like without artificial enlightening. And I think that's why in the end František Uldrich, the DOP, he decided to be co-author of the screenplay, because it's a very much DOP film, I would say now.
Mm-hmm. Well, František Uldrich was sort of an up-and-coming director of photography at that time, who worked with incredibly important directors like František Vláčil, with whom he shot period pieces, Valley of the Beast, which is this gorgeous film from early history of Czech nobility. And then there is black and white gorgeous film. And and but he also shot with František Vláčil this wonderful film, period piece from World War II, Adelheid, one of my most favorite films. And so he started working with Ewald Schorm. He actually worked on The Return of Lost Son in '66, and then he continued. He had a very, very, very long and wonderful career in Czech cinema. This story, though, of the bread slippers is in some ways also kind of close to heart to Ewald Schorm because of sort of this strong moral message. You know, there is this lady who's very self-centered, and even at that really dark times, she when bread is really scarce, she's demanding that the shoes made of bread are delivered to him. So I think that's sort of like a moral story that would have been close to Ewald Schorm's heart.
Especially because it's a Faustian story, and I would say that this is the theme of Faust, which is the second theme of Prague, very important. Was also close to the Schorm's heart. No, this is a very ambivalent story, like many of them, and we have, as you know, Faust's house in Prague, which is probably fiction, but it is said that it's in Prague when Dr. Faust was really taken by the devil, which caused an enormous hole in the roof, which is the thing you can also see in the film.
Mm-hmm. It's This film was the direction of Bread Slippers was one of the sort of at the tail end of Ewald Schorm's career, because as with his also the way that he approached society or what he was bringing from whatever contemporary life into his films, his film, The 7th Day, 8th Night, Sedmý osmá noc, was sort of broke his back, let's say, in cinema. It was a really direct response to the invasion, which was happening at this time when he was directing Bread Slippers, and so this film that he made, that was written by Zdeněk Mahler, was really one of the few films that really conveyed the feelings of people about this uncertain time, this really troubling time. And that film never made it to cinemas at that time. It was sent to the so-called vault, and Ewald Schorm soon after was fired and was not able to make films, and he moved to his second love, which was theater, and he made an incredible contribution in that realm, actually bringing cinema into the stages through the so-called Laterna Magica, a wonderful theater. I think it's a good time that we picked up on the cast of this wonderful film.
So, I mean, the role, I must say, the Tereza Tuszyńska, who plays the Countess, she's a Polish actress, and I don't remember her in other Czech films, but there was probably a question of co-production between Czechoslovakia and Poland, which was a kind of rare in that time. Then what we see here in the role of the devil, in the male role, is Josef Sommer. Maybe some film freaks will remember him as a very famous side character in Jiří Menzel's Closely Observed Trains, where he plays the also seducing railway man with a very famous stamp scheme. So this film, Closely Watched Trains, really imprinted him or made from him a seducer. He played a lot of roles like that. Then in the role of unhappy count who is in love with the countess. This is Josef Abraham, who was in that time also one of the most famous Czech actors, and who was extremely good in these period pieces. He was something like a gentleman-like actress, chamber actress for the theater also, right? And what else? These guys, they are rather unknown as actors.
I will have to go back to both Josef Abraham and Josef Sommer. Josef Sommer was actually very one of his best roles for me is in the film The Joke, directed by Jaromil Jireš.
Yeah, definitely.
Which
another seducer, as you can see.
Another seducer, based on the wonderful book by Milan Kundera, who actually co-wrote the script. And that's actually that film is from 1968, and that's actually a film that brought both Josef Sommer and Ewald Schorm together on the screen, because Ewald Schorm has a small role in the film. He always played, when Ewald Schorm played in acted in cinema, he sort of played versions of himself in some ways on another. And so he's actually one of the most important characters, Ewald Schorm, in the film The Party and the Guests. He's the silent guest who never says anything and disappears and creates this whole drama of that film. But Josef Sommer had a really long acting life. Unfortunately, he passed away only last year in 2022.
Yeah.
And he was one of the most beloved actors, I believe, and kind of also known, at least to me, he felt like a man of a strong character. Same for Josef Abraham, who as a young man was incredibly attractive, and was cast like here in Bird Slippers as the subject of desire. Always a little shy, but you could see him in a very similar role in Juraj Hertz's Morgiana from 1972. That's some film that maybe some Americans would know. But then he was also an actor with a talent for sort of a kind of awkward comedy. He was a little awkward sometimes in his delivery, and he was in wonderful films, wonderful comedies that, during a really tough time, the comedies were what kept sort of cinema going after between 68 and 89. And one of those comedies is Way to Scarper, that is, I think, kind of a cult film. And he also died last year, and led a very, very long had a very long acting career in theater and in cinema. But in the previous episodes, they were also absolutely wonderful actors. Along with Jan Klusak in Last Golem, there is an actor that I don't think would tell much to American audiences, but to Czech audiences, especially people who came of age during the 80s. Josef Bláha was an actor who was in many those films made for children, and one of those really wonderful films made for children was film Girl on Broomstick, Saxana, where Josef Bláha had this really funny role, but he was also very funny in TV series, and one of the fantastic, truly fantastic and sort of sci-fi comedy TV series for children called The Visitors, which is about these extraterrestrials who come to Earth. Josef Blaha was just one of the most important actors in there. And another trivia: Jan Schwankmajer contributed to that TV series enormously. In the sort of framing story, there obviously the two most important actors are Milena Dvorska, who started in cinema together with Jan Werich in films that were written by your father, and then had a really long career in theater and in cinema in all the stages of her life. But the most important actor, I think, of this film is Miloš Kopecký.
Yes, we are going to see him soon again. He was a very special personality, starting his career right after the war, also in this theater of the satire where my father and Blažek and Oldřich Lipský were starting, and. Of course, he was really perfect actor, although I think he had no actor's education. I have a feeling. Also, his physics, which was very attractive, was due to the fact that he was of course Jewish, and his mother died in the Holocaust, and it was one of these very unhappy cases where the people were divorcing because of our children, because one of them was Jewish. So his mother died in the Holocaust and his father survived, and Miloš Kopecký the whole of this life suffered of terrible depressions, and he could only feel good, in fact, when he was acting during the playing. So his profession made him very happy. My father and him were friends, and my father was using him practically in all his films. He made with Oldřich Lipský, starting Lemonade Joe, where he plays the bad guys. And here I would like to mention that the Hogo Fogo in Lemonade Joe is in fact the copy of John Carradine's character in The Stagecoach by John Ford. And because this figure of this stagecoach bad man was always a very beloved figure by my father, and it was something like his funny alter ego. And starting this point in every film Oldřich Lipský and my father made was in one of the main roles with the Miloš Kopecký, like if he would be a kind of mascot or icons for their collaboration. And here we also see him as a seducer. Which was when I see these characters in the Czech film of this time, and I remember the era, I have a feeling that this was more a dream of the Czech man of this time than reality to be something like a Miloš Kopecký in the role of this Fabricius. Yes.
He had a very special talent for the villains, the bad guys in movies.
Irony. It was always played with irony. And I remember as you remember, Miloš Kopecký, he was playing in a TV miniseries which was so famous, which was called Hospital, on the hospital next to the town or whatever. And there he was playing a very famous surgeon, orthopedist, and he was so fantastic in this miniseries that many people wrote him asking him how to proceed with their health problems, with their medical issues, yes, because they were kind of believing that he was real Dr. Strossmayer.
He definitely lived the roles really well. I remember him as Mackie Messer. He's known for singing that Krolvaj song from Bertolt Brecht's play, and he sang this song with such a gusto and quite expressive type of acting. He was also absolutely fabulous in Baron Munchausen. That's Karel Zemann's film that your father co-wrote. He delivers absolutely fantastically. Not only the physical performances, but also the narration that kind of leads viewer through that film. But yes, he's the evil man in Adela. Hasn't had a supper yet, and in the mysterious castle in the Carpathians, films that we will definitely revisit. But as you say, yes, comedy was a huge, or satire was a huge part of his toolbox. It's and I think that his strong physical appearance, as well as the fantastic acting, made him one of the most beloved actors of that era. There is now the scene, the dancing scene, how our count is finally.
May I mention something for that? Because I was just thinking of this scene, because this is the legend which is known in many cultures. I know it as a so-called red shoes, the principle of the shoes that dance the person who wears it to the death. It's quite, I would say, a story that moves from one European culture to another. So I think my father was using this. My father, who was an author of the idea of the film, was using this for as these bread shoes. Yeah, you also can find the same motif in the Hans Christian Andersen very rough stories about the girl who had walked on the breads. So that's something like the bread is the fact that bread is something saint, because it's for everyone. It's also for poor people, and you cannot mistreat it. This is something that is very typical for many European cultures.
Mm-hmm. Here we have Joseph Abraham as the only kind man to this countess, and who's the only one of all those men who died by his own hand. For me, that was a little mysterious how he ended up going to hell. But then, of course, it's forbidden in Christian culture to take your own life. But it's I think what we should also point out is as we saw in this scene, and it's still continuing, the very creative approach to the cinematography. They use many sort of distinct approaches, the repetition and then the skipping of the image, and I think that it's just very very interesting part of the film. You said that this episode especially has some relationship to the art of the era that is actually depicted in Bread Slippers.
Yes. Actually, when I see it now, after all these years, that I find remarkable how much Ewald Schirmbast, especially the DOP František Uldrich, how they are dealing with a Central European or Italian painting from 18th century, which was this is something that is still very much living if you travel around North Italy, but it's also something very much living if you travel around Prague, around Czech castles of today. So you can see the way of lighting, of enlightenment, the costumes, but also the way how people behave is very much accurate, I would say, to this era. There is a take when the Count, who is very much in disaster, is going downstairs when she is refused by the Countess, and you can see him on this this white stairs in his peruke and in his I think red stockings, and this is more or less very much one of the paintings I know very well, which is the Rococo paintings. And this is also a topic of the film, because the art of the era in the 18th century in Central Europe was absolutely torn from the reality that existed, in which the normal people are living, because there was one war after another. It was a period shortly before French Revolution. People were starving, and on the other side you had these very seducing and sophisticated visual art that was very, very beautiful in the same time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it was. This is what I don't know if it's interesting. I already said it once that Prague in 18th century was kind of in decline. Because it was not a capital, it was one of the provincial cities of the big Austro-Hungarian Empire. No one was speaking about Czech or Czech cultures. This was a purely popular thing that they were thinking maybe still some people in the country are speaking Czech and no one was taking care. But in the same time, all these very beautiful palaces, which were rebuilt in 17th century or later, they were totally empty, like the house that we just saw. Because the people who were owners, the aristocracy who owned all these palaces, they didn't live there really. They were in Vienna, or they were traveling around other of the properties, and they were coming to Prague only from time to time. So that's why the whole city was kind of deserted. Yes, and so you could very easily imagine. I mean, someone like my father could really see in a building like this as a place that something like that would really happen.
Well, I think that also, though, that in some ways preserved all this history, this architectural history for the future. That some neglect is also helpful. As I live in New York, and then all the bustle of the life is just something doesn't serve it. It's torn down immediately because we need to replace it by something that is going to function now. And however, Prague is a total opposite. The buildings are repurposed and renovated and kept over centuries. And in some buildings you have, as you go from the basement all the way up, the centuries are changing from, as you see how buildings have edited one layer on another, and then all these layers are still present. If you go to Prague Castle, there is the seat where the Rudolf II, who was the emperor in the last Golem piece, that seed has literally all the centuries, all the architectural styles within several buildings, and some of them it was just one building has all the different styles. So that's interesting. But it's also interesting to me, now we're in the framing story that takes place in this swanky hotel. That that was between the wars, especially when there was the independent Czechoslovakia was born in 1918. There was also great investment into this gorgeous new styles that architecture did not stop in the old ages, but we had this functionalism. We had even important architects from abroad coming, and in Brno, for instance, Mies van der Rohe building, beautiful Villa Tugendhat and all that. So, on the background of these centuries of wonderful architecture built by Italian architects or Czech architects in Middle Ages, that you get, and then you have wonderful modern architecture. And so it's Prague is truly magic and really deserves to be visited, which, by the way, Jan Bernard, in his book about Ewald Schorm, he mentions that this film, Prague Nights, was or says that it was intended for being exported and used as sort of a promotion piece for people coming to Prague to visit. Do you think there is any truth to that?
No, this is what I think, and this is what I found. This is what I found more or less in these documents from Barandov. But I think this topic this aim was not fulfilled at all because of this. You were just talking about that film doesn't show that much Prague, and if it shows something like a forced house where the countess dies and being led to the hell. So being a tourist, I wouldn't go to such a place. Things like that are happening. But the intention was a little bit different. I think that this was a project. This was a studio project, commercial project that was planned. And in that time, plan was really filled. This was not like a Netflix that in the moment you have some other informations about the fact that film will not be well accepted, so you stop the project. No, then so something was planned. It was made. Because this was this way of I would say communist planning. And but in the meantime, more this project of the Prague Nights continued. Less the leaders of the studio are interested in it. So my opinion is that step by step it was running downstairs down. It was running forward like by itself with the different directors, different styles, different maybe I would say philosophy, but paradoxically, as I said today, I'm surprised when I saw the film after 40 years how good it functions. It's really strange what is happening to films. You have very famous films by very famous directors. You want to show it to your children or to the next generation, and then they stare at it like it's absolutely not interesting for me. It's not even interesting for you, and this is just the opposite, that you watch it and it's more interesting than 50 years ago. So in the end, it's good that it was made but it was not good for the tourists. It's good for us.
Well, now we're seeing the last story of the film, which is the poisoner, and it's quite unique in actually the action only illustrating whatever is sung in the background. The story is actually in the form of songs. And it's a good time to actually speak about the music in this film and music in general in Czech cinema at that time, or Czechoslovak cinema. There are two absolutely most important composers of that era, Zdeněk Liška and Jan Klusák. Jan Klusák, we saw him as an actor in his acting role in The Last Golem, but Jan Klusák was a composer that Ewald Schorm employed almost exclusively in all his films. But Jan Klusák also worked with your father on his short films and with many other filmmakers. Zdeněk Liška was an extremely important composer. Unlike Jan Klusák, who apart from writing music for films, he had a very important part of his career writing for concert music and being very much in touch of the contemporary scene worldwide. He experimented a lot, and he brought his experiments from the concert music to cinema. Zdeněk Liška was a completely different case. He was 100% solely employed as a composer of music for cinema. And at this time, in the 60s, he wrote an incredible amount of, he worked on an incredible amount of projects. He would write 6 to 8 music for 6 to 8 films a year, which was an enormous output. And at this time, as he was writing music for Prague Nights, he was writing absolutely wonderful orchestral score for We Eat the Fruits of Paradise by Věra Chytilová. He also wrote an absolutely gorgeous music for Juraj Hertz's The Cremator. And so there, Zdeněk Liška, he was so much in demand. He was actually the exception, and he was the one who was choosing the project. It was not like with others, where the directors just asked a composer to work on them. No, it was Zdeněk Liška who chose, and so that's quite interesting that he chose this project. He worked in very beautiful sound studio with an orchestra Fisio that was especially created for working on music for films. And this studio was, for instance, also used by David Lynch and his composer Badalamenti, I believe is his name, in the 80s and 90s. So it's there was a great fertile ground for Zdeněk Liška, and he experimented very much. He was able to make music for Ikari XB1, a sci-fi movie. He was making music for sort of in the neoclassicist style, which you could witness in this film. And all these, this wealth of information I received from Pavel Klusák, who's actually the son of Jan Klusák, who is an important music critic and author. He wrote, published 5 books about music and his own writing. But he also made an absolutely wonderful documentary about Zdeněk Liška. It's called Music Zdeněk Liška, and it was released by the Criterion Collection as part of the Cremator release, recent release, and it's also available on the Criterion channel. So I would strongly recommend that you check this film out. What are your memories of Zdeněk Liška's music or Jan Klusák's music in the cinema?
Not only in cinema, I still have a very good record of the Jan Klusák symphonies, and if not Zdeněk Liška, which was the work of Zdeněk Liška more, remind me.
Well, Zdeněk Liška wrote music also for Markéta Lazarová, Valley of the Beasts.
Of course, first of all, Lucy, this is very interesting. Why I was hesitating to answer. Zdeněk Liška is one of the composers, of the film composers, where you forget that there is a music, you know. But this is really a secret of the music compositions today. We are speaking about Delry, we are speaking about Morricone and everything, but there is a lot of compositions by Zdeněk Liška that if you for example tell me ask me to sing a melody from Markéta Lazarová, I cannot do it, but I remember that there was a fantastic soundtrack, yes, and it's always like this with them. I'm just now checking Adelheid, yes, Adelheid. This is a very kind of a hidden and powerful music in Adelheid. No, he was also working with Juraja Kubisko, Vtáčkova, Siroty a blázni, which was a very powerful film with a beautiful music, and for example, we are speaking about these so-called simple films from 60s. There is a forgotten film which is called Honor and Glory, if you remember. with Rudolf. This is the story of 30 Years' War from 16th century, with Rudolf Hrušínský as a nobleman who suddenly is in the position to solve one of these typical moral dilemmas, war dilemmas. And there is a fantastic music, I remember, for example. But most of all, I remember the collaboration of Liška with František Vláčil. Definitely.
František Liška was also the composer of Jan Švankmajer films, and Ivo Špajl, the sound mixer or sound master of many of Czech and Czechoslovak films. He will work closely with Zdeněk Liška. He started as a young 11. He spoke about how Liška employed also all these sort of sounds from life, like a sound of typewriter, and was mixing. He was very much interested in using sound creating machines, so that he was employing whatever was happening in contemporary music within the compositions for his work for cinema. And it's true that he serves the image and the story, but it definitely not forceful way. Apparently, as you could read in some of the sort of fora on Czech Film Database, for instance, Czech audiences are very much able to recognize Liška music already after first few seconds. And I definitely can hear also sort of the relationship of the sound, like the part that is in this film, in the last column. It's you could hear some motifs that were in other films, and so there is sort of like a through line going from one film to another in the work of Zdeněk Liška. This film, this episode, Poisoner, has, as I said, songs, and the lyrics were written by Pavel Kopta, who is a quite interesting author himself. He actually started as assistant director in cinema, but then eventually just ended up really working in music. And what may be interesting to American audiences to know that he wrote Czech lyrics for American blues songs. He was also responsible for bringing chanson to Czech popular music, working with Hanna Hegerova.
He also wrote Czech lyrics for West Side Story, if you know about that.
Wonderful. And then he also wrote lyrics for Edith Piaf songs and Jacques Brel songs, and so it's interesting how this kind of film brings together these people who worked on so much interesting cinema. Speaking of Markéta Lazarova, by the way, the lover boy in this episode is actually František Velecký, who's a Slovak actor who had a lead role in Markéta Lazarova, and it was shot in 66, started 65 until 67, and that brought him to the Czech scene. It was nice to see an attractive man actually being in Czech cinema.
Yeah.
The genre in Czech cinema is something quite special. We don't really boast. We cannot boast about many sort of really serious genre films. This is an attempt to make a horror film, or at least a macabre film, but still, that being a Czech film, there's still a lot of satire in it. And then to me, Czech genre cinema is sort of more in the realm of comedies than in straight-faced horror. Maybe we can call fantasy, but we have only one sci-fi film, Ikarie XB1, by Jindřich Polák. But What is your take on genre in Czech cinema?
But this is interesting what you say. I'm your opinion that comedy is definitely the most famous and most exploited genre. Why don't we have horrors? I think that the whole 20th century was such a horror that no one was really tempted to repeat it in a cinema or in the screenplay. And this is not by accident that I say it. Just imagine that in the countries that are the most peaceful, like Canadian society, they are really the most horror films and horrified. Cronenberg is Canadian, no? So this is always this mankind need to fill your soul with horror, and I think that's why the Czech culture doesn't really know that much of horror in the literature of film, and this is always, and it's always more or less in a level of irony. I mean, people are afraid in reality. They don't need to be afraid in cinema. Maybe it's naive what I say, but this is really what I mean. But if not, there was outside of this new wave cinema that most of the connoisseurs in the world know, there was something like a commercial stream of the Czechoslovak cinema running, and this was in fact the cinema that was feeding the box offices, because new wave films were sold abroad. This was a kind of vitrine of communism, as they say, but this was not not very many people were going to see it in the movies. I mean, films by Jan Němec or Ewald Schorm were nothing like a box office. What was real box office were these films made more or less the same period, like Prague Night, which were, for example, like I Killed Einstein, Gentlemen, which is a comedy by Oldřich Lipský, sci-fi comedy, or You Are a Widow, Sir, which is directed by Václav Vorlíček. The screenwriter is always one certain Miloš Macourek, who is really a master of the sci-fi satire. It's really world niveau, I would say. And these films that were shot and presented at in the same time, like Prague Nights, are really on a fantastic level, and they brought a very, very large audience. What I am never sure about, if these films are also funny for Americans, for example, or for Western audience in general, because the irony in these films insists always in the fact that they are mocking of the small bourgeois mentality, of the closed mentality of the Czech people, of their impossibility to travel and so on.
Mm-hmm. That's a quite interesting thing. My other theory about why the genre was not so presented, why there is not much of a supernatural in Czech cinema, but there's not even that much of eroticism. Those were like really 60s. Outside of that, the cinema was just very much kind of tempered down in that, and I thought that was because of sort of the communists considering all these sort of decadent bourgeois tendencies, and so it was discouraged on the script stage already. And I know it for fact that Juraj had a lot of problems with his film. If in his generation, which would be the generation of the Czechoslovak New Wave, he was pretty much the only one who was so keen on shooting genre films, and he experienced so much difficulties with the censors cutting down all his blood scenes or erotic scenes or really scary moments. I would say that this was a hidden gem that even though we say it was not hugely popular, it still had almost 400,000 viewers, which it's not that bad, especially in today's.
Well, today it would be a lot, but in that time this was not that much. But people are going to watch absolutely everything that were in the movie theater, especially Czech films.
Yes. So I think that it's a great contribution from Deaf Crocodile for releasing the film. And as we are in the credits, I wanted to thank you, Tereza, for this wonderful conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun, and I hope that people who will be who will buy this Blu-ray will enjoy it as well.
Well, I thank you to Denis Bartok, and I thank you, Irena. I thank the Deaf Crocodile in the name, the whole Czech culture and the Czech cinema, and thank you very much.
Hello!
This is Matt.
And Emily from Scarecrow Video in Seattle, Washington. Did you know that we have the largest video collection in the world? We have over 146,000 titles and growing. That's over 3 times more than Netflix, Amazon, Max, and Hulu combined.
Plus, Scarecrow now offers rent-by-mail service throughout the U.S., so check out scarecrowvideo.org for details. You can catch Emily and I, or Matt and I, if that was going to be you saying that, on our bi-weekly YouTube show, Viva Physical Media, for video recommendations and so much more.
See ya!
Bye!
Thank you for listening. To hear more shows from the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network, please select the link in the description